Field reports begin with grainy picked feeds, salvage logs, and the testimony of survey teams who recovered fragments of once-sealed transmission relays from debris fields near former battle sites. Archaeological detachments excavating abandoned fortress monasteries report corridors pitted by plasma and coated in an ash that resists routine spectrometric analysis. Their patchwork records note the same behavioral signatures across independent sites. Careful, surgical strike patterns, deliberate erosion of local command structures, caches of disrupted supply lines left to ensure collapse rather than occupation. Eyewitness accounts from planetary partisans and Imperial Army veterans who survived contact often describe an enemy that never lingered once its objective was achieved, that vanished into the shadows after a single, decisive intervention. These disparate sources, when cross-referenced, converge into a single operational profile. The title assigned to that profile by Imperial scholars and field operatives is the Raven Guard. Material evidence recovered from old staging grounds and Ravenspire outposts supports a lineage of doctrine rather than a single campaign. Surface inscriptions, maintenance ledgers, and the remnants of vehicle schematics indicate an early emphasis on light transport and stealth auxiliaries. Observers compiling these records produced consistent notes on recruitment patterns, on the modification of standard issue vehicles for low observable signatures, and on the development of specialized close-range ordnance optimized for disabling rather than annihilating systems. These technical traces align with testimonies describing units that preferred precision to attrition, and whose engagements were planned to impose strategic shock by surgical decapitation of command nodes. The convergence of hardware, habits, and doctrine forms the primary evidentiary base from which modern studies of the Raven Guard extrapolate their origins and operational character. Born from the wider context of the Emperor's Great Crusade, the Raven Guard traced their foundational identity to unique cultural and environmental pressures on their homeworld and its satellite systems. Their Primarch, Corvus Corax, is recorded in contemporary sources as the figure whose leadership reshaped the Legion's doctrine. Corax's upbringing on the moon Deliverance and his subsequent reunion with the Legion mark the doctrinal inflection point where pre-existing terror tactics and counterinsurgency practices were replaced by a refined emphasis on stealth, sabotage, and rapid surgical strikes. Modern archival consensus places Deliverance as the crucible of the Legion's later operational culture. Its landscapes and social history are repeatedly cited in personnel files and Primarch biographies as formative. The Legion's specialization in infiltration and guerrilla warfare is not merely tactical preference, but a cultivated expression of origins that informs every aspect of their organization. Quantifying the Raven Guard requires separating pre-heresy and post-heresy datasets. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the Legion existed at scales consistent with other original Space Marine legions, but suffered catastrophic losses that materially altered its post-heresy disposition. Pre-heresy rosters and campaign manifests place the Legion among the smaller legions by number, with recorded campaigns that nonetheless earn significant strategic credit. Contemporary post-heresy assessments show a markedly reduced chapter disposition. Modern listings identify the Raven Guard's strength in chapter form as numerically modest compared to larger successor chapters, with official registers and recent Imperial returns referencing effective strengths on the order of 1,000 battle brothers for the active chapter in the current era. These figures are essential when modelling recruitment throughput, deployment cycles, and the logistical footprint required to sustain Raven Guard operations in the Imperium's present age. The physical profile of an Astartes remains relevant when assessing how Raven Guard individuals execute their doctrine. Canonical engineering and biology references place a Space Marine's standing height when wearing power armor, typically at just over 2 meters, with mass estimates that vary widely depending on armor configuration and augmentation. Estimates consolidate around a range that reflects both literary descriptions and role-playing source material. A fully armoured Astartes will generally present as 2 to 3 meters tall, with mass measurements inflated by the armour and augmentations to fall into the hundreds of kilograms. When modelling infiltration operations, especially those that require movement through constrained urban environments or subterranean networks, allowances must be made for these physical dimensions. Raven Guard tactics favour gear and approaches that accommodate their frame while minimising detectability. The physiological and engineering constraints of Astartes' bodies and their armour systems are therefore integral to the design of Raven Guard weaponry, tools, and transport solutions. Distinctive traits of the Raven Guard are visible across culture, organisation, and equipment. At the doctrinal level, they emphasise concealment, surgical application of force, sabotage, and rapid extraction. Their training prioritises silent insertion, lateral movement in three-dimensional battle spaces, and close-quarters neutralisation of high-value targets. Equipment and uniform choices follow from this doctrine. Dark livery and muted heraldry aid concealment, while specialised weapons and toolkits favour controlled destruction. Weapons configured for short-range lethality, breaching tools adapted for non-destructive entry when intelligence value outweighs area denial, and incendiary charges designed to remove infrastructure without scattering evidence. Their vehicles are frequently modified to reduce thermal and radar signatures. Where heavier platforms are employed, they are adapted for rapid disembarkation and remote deployment of small autonomy elements. This concentration on limited, high-impact tools makes their logistical tail lean relative to more attritional chapters, but increases the technical load on armourers who must maintain stealth modifications under field conditions. Recruitment channels and gene seed management reveal another dimension of Raven Guard distinctiveness. Historically, the Legion drew recruits from harsh, resource-poor regions, environments that bred resilience, independence, and an aptitude for small unit tactics. In later eras, the chapter's recruitment is coded by selection criteria that favour psychological resilience, aptitude for improvisation, and a predisposition towards solitary or small team operations. Gene seed handling follows accepted Adeptus Astartes protocols, but shows particular attention to preserving traits useful to infiltration and long-duration deployment. Internal medical records and gene seed logs indicate stringent screening processes and, where available, selective propagation of traits associated with sensory acuity and metabolic efficiency. These biological priorities are complemented by cultural rites that reinforce the values of silence and patient observation, integrating selection, training, and cultural formation into a single pipeline. Technology choices within Raven Guard elements are consistent with a low observability, high mobility doctrine. Armor variants frequently incorporate matte, absorbent surface treatments to attenuate reflected bands of light and to reduce detection by common optical sensors. Helmets and sensor arrays are optimized for passive data collection and selective emission to avoid active sensor signatures. Battlefield communication protocols emphasize short burst transmissions and physical couriers where electronic traffic would compromise operations. Their engineers adapt standard chassis designs for stealth, grav sled racks modified to reduce engine acoustic signature, gravitic dampers tuned for low-frequency operation, and vehicle bays reconfigured to launch small strike teams rapidly without exposing propulsion systems to enemy targeting. In addition to hardware alterations, their ordnance often uses shape charges and directional energy delivery to limit collateral signature and to maximize damage to targeted subsystems, rather than to create conspicuous battlefield effects. Weapons and offensive tools are selected with an analytic eye toward mission economy. Close quarters engagements favor short-barrel bolters, suppressed plasma cutters, and compact melter systems for their ability to disable or destroy hardened nodes at close range. Specialized blade and hook systems are maintained for silent kills and for rapid breaching of thin hulls and composite doors. Where ranged engagements are unavoidable, Raven Guard marksmen prefer ballistic profiles and munitions that minimize telltale plasma or thermal trails, and they employ fire control protocols designed to limit sensor traceability. Explosive devices in their inventory are commonly engineered for directed energy output, shaped to breach rather than to scatter, and often incorporate self-neutralizing timers to reduce the chance that evidence can be exploited by opposing forensic units. These choices reflect an operational calculus that privileges deniability and the preservation of intelligence value where possible. Vehicles used by Raven Guard elements reflect a balance between mobility and low signature. Modified atmospheric skimmers, low-profile transports and grav-assisted conveyances form the backbone of their intra-theatre movement. Heavier dropships are adapted to deliver small contingents with high precision and to rinse exhaust signatures so that orbital detection systems register diminished thermal traces post-disembarkation. Records detail several proprietary vehicle adaptations that appear across recovered blueprints, including stealth variants of larger craft and dedicated insertion platforms capable of rapid, silent deployment. Engineering logs mention field-created modifications such as heat sheath dispersal systems and temporary magnetic dampers that reduce the detectability of approach vectors. The logistical implication is notable. Maintaining these vehicles requires specialized dockyard capabilities and rare components, but such costs are offset by the strategic value of successful clandestine operations. Operational doctrine and lifestyle interact in ways that affect maintenance cycles, habitability, and theatre readiness. Individuals within Raven Guard formations are trained to operate with minimal external support for extended periods, to subsist off captured supplies when necessary, and to avoid conventional staging areas that would increase vulnerability. Campsites are temporary and designed for rapid dismantling. Field kitchens and rest cycles prioritize thermal masking and the minimization of light emissions. Internal logs uncovered in Ravenspire archives show schedules calibrated to circadian disruption techniques that reduce group detection probability and to maintenance windows timed during predicted electronic quiet periods. These practices impose psychological demands on recruits. Consequently, the chapter's training program includes stress inoculation routines and extended isolation exercises intended to condition mind and body for the peculiar demands of long-range infiltration. Equipment repair and sustainment within Raven Guard units rely on highly skilled artificers who combine traditional chapter smithcraft with improvisational engineering. Where larger chapters might accept extended refit cycles inside orbital yards, Raven Guard technicians are taught to perform field-level restoration under stealth constraints. This produces a core of armourers adept at jury-rigging signature-reducing systems, fabricating low-reflectance surface coatings from field-available materials, and recalibrating sensor arrays to operate with minimal active output. Field manuals recovered from redundant caches emphasize modular components that can be swapped quickly and silently, and document alternative fabrication techniques intended for use where manufactory-grade parts are unavailable. These practices enable sustained clandestine operations at the expense of a higher immediate technical burden on small teams. Distinct personal and cultural markers also appear in the archival record. Raven Guard iconography favours stylized avian motifs rendered in subdued palettes, used primarily for internal identification rather than battlefield display. Ritual practices observed in recovered chronicles focus on the preservation of secrecy, rites of silence, commemorations of unseen victories, and ceremonial treatments for those who die while operating in the shadows. These rites are consistent with an organizational psychology that valorizes sacrifice for the strategic benefit of others, and that institutionalizes measures to limit the development of public cults of personality that could jeopardize operational security. Leadership selections and promotion pathways prioritize demonstrated mission discipline and aptitude for clandestine command, shaping an officer cadre that is functionally different from more ostentatious chapters. When assessing the Raven Guard from a logistical and administrative viewpoint, their footprint is paradoxically light in some dimensions and heavy in others. They require fewer conventional supply trains because of their preference for rapid strikes and short deployment windows. At the same time, the specialized nature of their equipment, stealth coatings, rare sensor filters, proprietary dampers, creates a supply dependency on high-precision components and a need for secrecy-preserving supply routes. Strategists and administratum correspondents who compile sustainment models therefore treat Raven Guard deployments as low-mass, high-complexity operations. The number of physical assets deployed is limited, but each asset requires high-integrity maintenance and secure replenishment channels. This administrative profile informs how the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Administratum and field commanders, allocate scarce resources when Raven Guard elements are assigned to a theatre. Finally, an assessment of battlefield utility emerges from combing combat reports with recovered doctrine. Where attritional chapters aim to hold ground, the Raven Guard aim to alter the shape of a campaign by removing its critical anchors. Their effectiveness is measured not in sustained territorial control, but in the speed and precision with which they can remove or disable strategic targets, command nodes, power plants, logistics hubs, and high-value personnel. The tactical calculus that underlies their deployment emphasizes the maintenance of plausible deniability and the preservation of intelligence assets, making Raven Guard operations a strategic tool for larger Imperial war plans rather than an end in themselves. Longitudinal analysis of their recorded engagements shows consistent success when mission parameters favor secrecy and precision, and comparative difficulty when forced into protracted frontal engagements for which their doctrine is ill-suited. Initial pictographic feeds, salvaged transcripts from battlefield sifts, and fragmentary archaeological dossiers converge on a consistent pattern. Sensors and eyewitnesses record strikes that arrive and vanish like shadows, units that appear in ruined skylines and are gone before counterfire corrects, and a persistent set of material signatures, matte black ceramite, raven motif iconography, and a preference for lightweight, low-signature insertion platforms. Analysts cross-referencing orbital reconnaissance with Imperial Navy logs and recovered Vox packets noted a disproportionate number of precision strikes, short-duration raids, and surgical extractions associated with a single lineage of Adeptus Astartes. These records, compiled into imperially sanctioned dossiers and corroborated across multiple regional archives, point toward a legion whose operational doctrine emphasizes stealth, speed, and surgical effect. The consolidated entry in multiple canonical registries identifies that lineage as the Raven Guard. Archaeological and pict feed reconstructions place the origin of the Raven Guard on the world Deliverance, a moon circling the hive world Kayvaan. Primary source narratives and campaign logs describe Deliverance as a world shaped by struggle, its early population living under the strain of slave traffic and local warlords before the arrival of the Primarch known as Corvus Corax. Contemporary analyses of recovered field reports indicate that when the Legion consolidated under Corax's leadership, recruitment patterns shifted toward a preference for recruits with proven reflexes, local survival experience, and an aptitude for small unit initiative rather than the massed frontal assault orientation favoured elsewhere. This recruitment emphasis and the environmental pressures of their founding world are repeatedly cited as formative to their long-term tactical culture and equipment choices. Physical stature and augmentation standards for Raven Guard battle brothers conform broadly to the wider imperially codified attributes of the Adeptus Astartes. Measurements recorded in servitor-maintained medical logs and surgical registers indicate that, when wearing standard power armor, a fully augmented Astartes typically stands slightly over 2 meters tall. Power armor itself contributes significant bulk. Contemporary armor schematics and maintenance sheets list an armor mass baseline that, while heavily mitigated by integrated gravitic dampers and servo actuation, adds several £100 to the system's apparent mass. Reconstructions based on comparative entries from Deathwatch and Codex adjuncts place a reasonable working average for a Raven Guard battle brother at just over 2 meters in height in harness, and with a combat loadout that varies by role. These anthropometric measures are used operationally in transport manifest calculations, drop pod design, and boarding tactic planning, and thus are reflected consistently across logistical documentation. The Raven Guard's material culture includes both common Astartes implements and a suite of specialized tools suited to infiltration and rapid withdrawal. Standard bolters, bolt guns, and close combat blades appear in chapter inventories and recovered caches, but archival inventories and battlefield salvage reports show an increased prevalence of suppressed and modified small arms, reconfigured melter projectors, adapted for brief exposure windows, and a distinct preference for armor patterns optimized for reduced sensor signature. One recurring element in after-action recoveries is the Corvus pattern modifications, helmet facings and augment displays configured for low-light reconnaissance, integrated light absorption coatings on shoulder plates and greaves, and modular rucksack units adapted to house rapid deployment grapnel systems and collapsible ceramite shields. Engineering manifests and servitor maintenance logs indicate that these adaptations are not merely cosmetic, but integrated into the Raven Guard's doctrine. Their kit reduces detection time and increases extraction flexibility. Population estimates for the Legion across its known historical span must be couched with caution due to gaps in surviving records and the extensive losses the Raven Guard suffered during the Horus Heresy. Post-heresy reconstitutions and later Second Founding records show a significant contraction in numbers, followed by gradual recovery into successor chapters. Archive extrapolations use recruitment cadence records, gene seed harvest logs, and confirmed muster rolls to place pre-heresy Legion strength within the established range for a Nightingale Legion, while post-heresy figures show a fraction of that number until regrowth across the centuries. Analysts working from Codex references and Black Library narratives observe that the heresy inflicted disproportionate casualties on the Raven Guard early in the conflict, an event that shaped their later emphasis on dispersion, hit-and-run tactics, and a doctrine of surgical engagement designed to preserve men and material. Distinctive physiological and behavioral traits recur in surgeons' notes and psychological assessments within Raven Guard records. Gene seed variations in their Astartes stock reflect incremental differences across the original Legion. Surgical logs denote a tendency for rapid reflex conditioning, enhanced night vision adaptations, and a psychological profile that privileges independent decision-making under ambiguous command parameters. Behavioral reports compiled after engagements frequently note a marked proclivity toward decentralized command at the squad and company level, with sergeants and captains empowered to enact immediate tactical solutions without waiting for higher authorizations. These recorded tendencies are not presented as universal. Rather, they are statistical commonalities visible across decades of operations and reflected in training manuals, after-action critiques, and recruitment directives. The result is a force optimized for initiative, camouflage, and the ability to exploit fleeting opportunities in contested spaces. Behavioral reports compiled after engagements frequently note a marked proclivity toward decentralized command at the squad and company level, with sergeants and captains empowered to enact immediate tactical solutions without waiting for higher authorizations. These recorded tendencies are not presented as universal. Rather, they are statistical commonalities visible across decades of operations and reflected in training manuals, after-action critiques, and recruitment directives. The result is a force optimized for initiative, camouflage, and the ability to exploit fleeting opportunities in contested spaces. Training regimens documented in adaptational manuals further refined these traits: emphasis on individual camouflage disciplines, zero-noise movement, rapid site infiltration and exfiltration, and detailed target prioritization. Examination of training curricula and recorded exercises suggests that the Raven Guard's selection and conditioning processes sought to entrench personal autonomy within a disciplined framework, producing combatants adept at executing complex missions with minimal external direction. Technology and production tenders held within the Raven Guard's logistics repositories indicate a pragmatic approach to engineering. Rather than pursuing heavy, long-term firepower investments at the chapter level, their arsenals lean toward modular systems that favor portability and maintenance ease in austere environments. Supply manifests and requisition dossiers recovered from cache sites show frequent orders for compact grav chutes, reduced signature jump packs, and constrained electromagnetic dampers used to disrupt local sensor arrays for short intervals. Vehicles allocated to the Raven Guard generally follow a doctrine of speed and low profile. Documented vehicle allocations include fast skimmer transports, stealth-modified dropships, and limited use of heavier armor restricted to situations where speed of deployment can be guaranteed. Vehicle engineering reports and field modification logs make recurrent note of the conservative use of heavy armor and the preferential fielding of rapid insertion platforms. Weapons loadouts, when analysed across multiple recovered inventories, reveal an expected reliance on the standard Imperium armament suite, augmented by suppressive and light-profile technologies. Close-quarters loadouts favour short-barreled bolters and precision-supported bolt pistols. Mid-range engagements frequently employ accuracy-tuned bolt guns with modified casings to reduce muzzle, flash and thermal signature. Salvage and forensics on recovered ordnance show repeated instances of field-customized silencers, reprofiled propellant columns, and adaptive targeting facings that allow operators to engage with minimal collateral detection. Engineers' post-engagement reports emphasize that such modifications require disciplined maintenance and a culture of meticulous fieldcraft. Otherwise, the reduced signature benefit is lost quickly through fouling or component failure. The Raven Guard's ordnance choices therefore reflect both tactical preference and logistical investment in maintenance and fieldcraft skills across the rank and file. Armour patterns historically associated with the Raven Guard adhere to the broader mark variations of Astartes' power armour, while favouring modifications that privilege stealth. Technical appendices and armour-sherd analyses identify frequent use of dark matte finishings, adaptive chromatophores integrated into shoulder pauldrons, and surfacing techniques that reduce the armour's radar profile. Internal schematics for helmets and heads-up displays emphasize augmented low-light optics, audio filtration systems adapted to the near-silent environment of infiltration, and tactical mimetic filters designed to simplify target recognition in low-visibility contexts. Such systems are documented both in field manuals and in servitor-maintained configuration logs. The consistency across disparate theatres of operation underscores a deliberate and codified armour doctrine oriented toward minimizing detection windows and enabling brief, high-effect engagements. Support tools and non-weapon implements are similarly curated for stealth and rapid utility. Reconnaissance packs contain compact sensor scramblers, fibre optic mapping nodes deployable for short-duration area mapping, and retractable grapnel anchors suited to vertical insertion. Combat engineers attached to Raven Guard detachments maintain a suite of demolition charges scaled for quiet breaches and precision sabotage instead of broad area destruction. Medical registries note the presence of enhanced auto-suture units and microstimulant injectors calibrated for rapid recovery from shock and localized trauma. Field surgeons and apothecaries emphasize light, rapid interventions over protracted field surgery. The overall pattern in the Raven Guard's toolkit is an emphasis on tools that preserve unit mobility, reduce exposure time, and permit immediate reconstitution after a strike. Vehicles and insertion platforms documented in campaign files reflect a clear operational preference. Dropships and assault craft allocated to the Raven Guard are frequently modified for quiet approach and high maneuverability, with retrofitted exhaust baffling and profile-reducing hull treatments recorded in maintenance ledgers. Smaller transports used for strike teams emphasize rapid exit and minimal sensor signature. War records and mission transcripts describe insertion tactics that prioritize low-altitude infiltration, short-duration ground presence, and rapid extraction under cover of darkness or engineered obfuscation. These tactics are repeatedly reinforced in after-action doctrine updates and in the surviving recruitment appeals that stress agility and surgical precision as defining chapter competencies. Taken together, the material culture, anthropometry, recruitment patterns, and technological investments of the Raven Guard present a coherent operational profile. The Legion's emphasis on stealth, surgical intervention, and small unit autonomy is visible in their armour customizations, weapons modifications, and insertion platform preferences. Their recruitment practices funnel individuals suited to quiet, decisive action into training that both amplifies those skills and imposes stringent maintenance disciplines necessary to sustain a low-signature fighting force. Historical losses and the weight of the Horus Heresy further condition doctrine toward preservation through dispersion and precision rather than attritional engagement. This synthesis of archival, eyewitness, and engineering sources forms the foundation for more detailed exploration of the Raven Guard's social organization and combat employment in subsequent sections. Civilian and military life within the world of Deliverance and its associated installations forms an interconnected system shaped by necessity and historical adaptation. Deliverance itself serves both as a memorial and a functional stronghold, its industrial surface orbiting above the planet Kayvaan. Early administratum records show that prior to its elevation to a fortress monastery, the moon contained dense urban strata populated by labourers and overseers, tied to Kayvaan's manufactoria output. Over the millennia, the Raven Guard integrated this pre-existing industrial lattice into their operational ecosystem. Civilian populations, mainly descendants of the original Kayvaan working class, occupy the lower Hab sectors and provide maintenance, manufacturing, and logistical support to the chapter's operations. They form a dependent but respected tier of the Raven Guard's infrastructure, protected yet kept at deliberate distance from the higher mysteries of the Astartes. The civilian infrastructure of Deliverance operates under indirect supervision by the chapter's serfs and lay administrators. Historical census compilations recorded by the Adeptus Astartes classify these serfs as non-augmented humans who have sworn fealty to the chapter. Their duties include upkeep of the forges, management of supply lines between Deliverance and Kayvaan, and the maintenance of orbital docks where chapter vessels are refitted. Within this tier, skilled artisans, data clerks, and servitor operators form distinct hierarchies. Promotion within these hierarchies is meritocratic and contingent upon reliability, precision, and discretion. Oral transmission among serf families suggests that oath-taking ceremonies occur upon reaching adulthood, reaffirming allegiance to the Raven Guard and acknowledging the lifelong obligation to serve the Deliverance Fortress Monastery. These civilian populations do not interact directly with the Astartes in everyday life. The few who do, primarily armourers, chirurgeons' assistants, or data technicians assigned to the apothecarian, treat such contact as a sacred duty. Testimonies preserved in the Kayvaan archives describe Astartes' presence as rare but transformative. Even brief appearances by an armour-clad warrior inspire reverence and fear. The economic system that supports the Raven Guard functions as a closed loop. Industrial tithe from Kayvaan's manufactoria is funneled into Deliverance's foundries, processed by serfs, and redistributed as chapter material. Trade beyond this system is minimal, restricted to administratum-sanctioned shipments of raw materials and genetic testing supplies for recruitment cycles. Military organisation within the Raven Guard mirrors the codified structure of post-heresy chapters, while retaining traces of the original Legion's decentralized command ethos. Each company maintains a level of operational independence, equipped to plan and execute missions without constant oversight. Battle Brothers are trained to act autonomously, relying on pre-established mission parameters and trust in their commander's intent rather than constant direct communication. This doctrine, born from necessity after the catastrophic losses at Isstvan, is institutionalized through rigorous training emphasizing initiative, judgment, and restraint. Records in the Deliverance Tactical Library show that the chapter deliberately maintains lower company headcounts than some of their counterparts, preferring smaller, more adaptable strike forces. Within the military hierarchy, leadership roles are defined less by grandeur and more by functional expertise. Captains are expected to be field leaders, not distant strategists. They carry the dual burden of command and personal participation in operations. Chaplains and librarians act as both spiritual anchors and tactical advisors, maintaining discipline through reasoned counsel rather than fear. The chapter's apothecaries, apart from their medical obligations, are archivists of genetic integrity, maintaining the Raven Guard's precious gene seed banks. The Tech Marines, trained under the Mechanicus, operate within strict compartmentalization, sharing only what is necessary from their Martian rights. Documentation retrieved from these officers' logs reveals a pattern of pragmatic minimalism. Equipment is repaired, not replaced. Assets are salvaged, not discarded. The daily life of a Raven Guard battle brother, as reconstructed from serf observations and chapter ritual manuals, is governed by a precise and restrained routine. Combat drills occupy much of their waking cycle, interspersed with periods of silent reflection or data review. Reclusium transcripts mention that Raven Guard practice a form of meditation known internally as shadow contemplation, a period of isolation where Marines review previous missions through mnemonic implants, identifying errors and refining instinctive responses. Unlike more overtly zealous chapters, their spiritual expression is subdued. Prayer and devotion to the Emperor occur in private or within minimal liturgical gatherings. Loud proclamations of faith are replaced by internal discipline and self-control. Rituals among the Raven Guard are pragmatic and rooted in remembrance rather than spectacle. The most enduring of these is the Oath of Shadows, a vow reaffirmed by each Marine upon return from deployment. The ritual is performed in the darkened halls of the Deliverance Reclusium. A battle brother kneels before a single light source, recites the names of his fallen comrades, and renews his pledge to serve unseen but effectively. Another lesser-known observance is the Black Feet, a test of endurance and silence undertaken by initiates prior to full induction. Participants must traverse the subterranean maintenance shafts beneath the fortress monastery alone, guided only by Auspec's data and instinct. Surviving the ordeal confirms both physical capability and the mental quietness demanded by the chapter's doctrine. Ethics within the Raven Guard are codified in simple principles that prioritize the mission, the preservation of life, and the minimization of unnecessary destruction. Historical analysis of their campaigns indicates a consistent pattern of attempting to spare non-combatants and infrastructure when tactically viable. This restraint is not born of softness, but of efficiency. Wasted destruction hinders future operations. Strategic assessments from Imperial observers frequently note the Raven Guard's distaste for collateral damage. They aim to cripple, not to annihilate, to disable, not to exterminate. This ethos aligns with their emphasis on precision strikes and calculated withdrawals, reflecting a philosophical divergence from more brutal Astartes traditions. The internal social structure of the chapter follows the expected delineations of Astartes' organization, but is uniquely flattened in practice. Seniority commands respect, but individual merit and tactical acumen often outweigh mere longevity. The chapter's culture values the competence of its warriors over ceremonial rank. Intra-company rivalry exists, though restrained, expressed through simulation combat and performance metrics rather than open competition. Veterans are frequently assigned mentorship roles, guiding newly elevated Marines through the intricacies of stealth warfare. Documentation suggests that these mentor-student bonds often last decades, forming the subtle social fabric that maintains cohesion despite the chapter's decentralization. Within this social lattice, a few internal castes exist, not by decree, but by function. First are the Battle Brothers, who serve as vanguard, elite reconnaissance units specializing in infiltration and sabotage. Second are the Tactical Marines, the backbone of the chapter, coordinating strikes and maintaining operational coherence. Assault specialists and devastator elements exist but are fewer, reflecting the chapter's doctrine of limited direct engagement. Supporting them are the serfs and chapter thralls who maintain logistical continuity. The distinction between these castes is practical, not ideological. Each acknowledges the role of the other, and the culture discourages arrogance or excessive hierarchy. The Raven Guard's leadership structure reflects the pragmatic minimalism seen elsewhere in their organization. At the apex stands the Chapter Master, currently Shrike in post-heresy continuity, inheriting a legacy defined by Corvus Corax's original vision. Command is exercised through council rather than decree. The Chapter Master convenes captains in regular tactical synods where decisions are debated and recorded. Such collaborative governance reflects both necessity and philosophy. No single commander, however capable, can oversee the dispersed operations typical of Raven Guard warfare. Captains thus possess considerable autonomy, and records from administratum liaisons confirm that Raven Guard strike forces have at times operated for years without direct communication with Deliverance, relying solely on mission parameters established before deployment. The Raven Guard's ethical system extends into their approach to leadership. Superiors are expected to lead by example rather than by command presence. Historical campaign data shows that Raven Guard officers often place themselves in the same operational risk as their subordinates, reinforcing mutual trust and minimizing the psychological distance between ranks. There are few ostentatious displays of authority. Insignia and heraldry are understated, and the focus remains on collective performance. This culture of humility originates from Corax himself, whose recorded speeches emphasize equality of purpose among all who serve, from the lowest serf to the most senior captain. Civilian life under Raven Guard protection is defined by quiet order and a sense of shared purpose. Deliverance and Kayvaan's orbital workers understand that their existence supports something larger and distant, even if the details remain beyond their comprehension. The relationship between the chapter and its civilian dependents is symbiotic. The Raven Guard provides security and limited autonomy, while the populace provides material sustenance. Rebellion or unrest is rare, and when it occurs, chapter intervention is swift but measured. Administratum incident reports describe the Raven Guard's preference for non-lethal pacification measures when dealing with internal dissent, prioritizing long-term stability over punitive spectacle. Life expectancy among Deliverance civilians is statistically higher than that of standard hive populations, due to stable environmental conditions and the enforced absence of criminal syndicates. Education focuses on technical proficiency. Literacy in machine code, basic metallurgy, and data maintenance is common. Religious observance is minimal, influenced by the Raven Guard's quiet demeanor. Shrines to the Emperor exist, but they are austere. Small alcoves carved into habitation corridors, illuminated by single votive lights rather than grand cathedrals. Faith is lived rather than proclaimed. Civilians mirror the reserved ethics of their guardians, valuing diligence, silence, and competence. Among the chapter serfs, a quasi-monastic lifestyle prevails. They live communally within the fortress, maintaining strict schedules synchronized with the battle brothers they serve. Each serf cluster is overseen by a custodian serf who reports to the chapter's reclusium. These custodians ensure that supplies, armory maintenance, and Delta archives remain functional. Observers note that serfs treat their labor as devotional practice, viewing the maintenance of war gear as an act of worship. The alignment between faith and function creates a societal rhythm in which every task, no matter how mundane, carries moral weight. Rituals within the serf and civilian communities mirror those of the Astartes but remain symbolic. The Day of Silence, observed once per planetary cycle, commemorates the massacre at Isstvan. On this day, all work ceases for a single hour, communication halts, and the entire fortress remains quiet. The act is not mandated by the Astartes but perpetuated by tradition. It reflects a shared understanding that remembrance need not be loud to be sincere. The ethical code guiding Raven Guard operations extends beyond combat to governance. Records indicate that the chapter enforces minimal interference in the political affairs of Kayvaan's surface, intervening only when external threats emerge. Governance of the planet's manufactoria remains under Adeptus Mechanicus oversight, yet the Raven Guard's influence ensures humane labor standards relative to typical Imperial norms. It is an implicit contract, loyalty in exchange for dignity. Over centuries, this policy has generated a loyal and efficient support base, a rare outcome in Imperial history where Astartes-dominated worlds often devolve into oppressive regimes. The leadership philosophy permeating every level of the Raven Guard structure traces back to Corvus Corax's personal doctrines. Surviving fragments of his writings, preserved in Mechanicus lexicon data vaults, articulate that freedom breeds precision, for the mind unbound calculates most clearly. This axiom underpins the chapter's trust in initiative and its distaste for micromanagement. Officers and serfs alike internalize this ethos. To act effectively without instruction is considered the highest form of service. Yet this freedom is not without discipline. Failure to uphold efficiency or discretion invites swift correction. Within the Greater Imperium, the Raven Guard occupy a peculiar moral space. Administratum officials categorize them as reliable yet unpredictable, efficient yet difficult to command. Their reluctance to engage in unnecessary displays of allegiance or ceremony occasionally draws suspicion from more orthodox bodies, particularly the ecclesiarchy. Nevertheless, their record of loyalty remains unblemished, and their methods, though unconventional, deliver measurable results. This balance between autonomy and faithfulness defines their collective character, pragmatic idealists bound by shadows. The Raven Guard's lifestyle, from the silent halls of Deliverance to the whispered corridors of Kayvaan's Manufactoria, thus represents an ordered ecosystem of restraint. Each layer, civilian, serf, Astartes and commander, contributes to a self-sustaining structure predicated on precision and quiet devotion. They do not seek glory or recognition. Their victories are measured in survival, stability, and the quiet continuation of duty. Through this disciplined modesty, the Raven Guard endure, maintaining both their humanity and their efficiency in an Imperium that often sacrifices one for the other. Within the annals of the Imperium's recorded history, few chapters exemplify both precision and secrecy to the degree maintained by the Raven Guard. Though their combat doctrines and origins are extensively documented, the intricate personalities of their leaders, the distinctive nature of their specialized formations, and the psychological patterns that define their operational instincts form an equally critical component of their enduring identity. The following records outline these aspects as compiled from Imperial archives, Mechanicus data logs, and Adeptus Administratum military treatises. The chapter's heritage is inseparable from its Primarch, Corvus Corax, a figure of profound intellect, austere morality, and tragic purpose. Corax's command philosophy continues to shape every Raven Guard commander who has inherited his mantle. From the earliest days on Deliverance, Corax emphasized that leadership must be earned through patience, observation, and sacrifice rather than ambition. He was a Primarch who disdained ostentation, preferring solitude and direct action to ceremonial authority. Many who served under him remarked that Corax's presence carried the silence of a shadowed world, a sense of purpose driven not by rage or pride but by obligation. His physical capabilities were formidable, yet it was his ability to anticipate patterns of deceit, betrayal, and weakness that made him one of the most unpredictable tacticians among his brothers. Following the Horus Heresy and Corax's eventual disappearance, the chapter's leadership was sustained by a long succession of pragmatic and highly secretive commanders. Among the most historically significant was Chapter Master Kayvaan Shrike, who led the chapter during the late Millennia 41 era. Shrike's tenure was marked by internal consolidation following gene seed strain issues and declining recruitment rates. He enforced a renewed adherence to stealth-based operations while quietly overseeing the chapter's slow reconstruction on Deliverance. Shrike's reforms were considered essential in preventing the Raven Guard from fragmenting into semi-autonomous warbands, a risk that loomed during the instability of the later millennia. His death in the defense of Kayvaan during a Mechanicus conflict was officially recorded as an honorable sacrifice, though certain records imply that he deliberately remained behind to ensure the evacuation of his men, a final act consistent with Corax's self-effacing example. Another figure of note is Kayvaan Shrike, a captain of the Third Company whose deeds elevated him to near-mythic status among the chapter's later generations. Shrike's early campaigns against the Orcs of the Castrol Novum system and his surgical strikes on Chaos warbands across the Segmentum Obscurus established him as a living extension of Corax's teachings. His strategies emphasized speed, precision, and total disruption of enemy logistics before direct engagement. Shrike's ascension to Chapter Master solidified the chapter's modern identity, a force of rapid insertion, high-value target elimination, and minimal collateral destruction. Even among the Adeptus Astartes, Shrike is unusual in his adherence to humanitarian restraint, a trait viewed by some within the Inquisition as sentimental, though in practice it aligns perfectly with the Raven Guard's ethical structure, which prioritizes efficiency of violence over spectacle. Several other leaders have maintained the chapter's integrity across the centuries, including Shadow Captain Corvide, whose operational record during the Beardub War demonstrated the Raven Guard's capacity to fight within the rigid structures of an Imperial campaign without compromising their stealth doctrines. Corviday's command of the 10th Company during the early millennia 41 period emphasized flexible scout integration and infiltration-based reconnaissance, forming the backbone of the chapter's current approach to cross-company operations. The Beardub conflict remains one of the few large-scale wars where the Raven Guard's full deployment strategy was observed first-hand by other Imperial forces, providing rare data for administrative analysts attempting to codify their methods. The internal military hierarchy of the Raven Guard differs from the Codex Astartes template. While the chapter nominally adheres to the 10-company structure, the distribution of assets is asymmetrical. Scout formations within the 10th Company often remain embedded in other companies for long durations, serving as auxiliary infiltration cells. Veterans are likewise rotated between command cadres depending on operational need rather than seniority. This dynamic structure allows each company to function with independence, capable of executing complex independent missions without centralized oversight, a design reflecting both Deliverance's guerrilla heritage and Corax's emphasis on decentralized warfare. The chapter's armory, though limited in scale compared to other first founding descendants, includes several war machines uniquely adapted to stealth warfare. The Storm Raven gunship remains the primary aerial strike platform, its maneuverability and compact profile suiting the chapter's need for rapid deployment and extraction. Modified land speeders, fitted with dampened exhausts and sensor masking systems, provide battlefield reconnaissance. Contemptor and Castroferrum pattern dreadnoughts are maintained sparingly, often deployed only when the mission requires overwhelming force or when the entombed warrior possesses irreplaceable tactical expertise. One such dreadnought, Ancient Corvin, is recorded to have served through 3 millennia of operations, his tactical mind integrated into the chapter's machine spirits for use in strategic simulations. The Raven Guard's war machines, while fewer in number, embody their Primarch's ideals of precision and restraint. Even the use of orbital bombardments is rare. The chapter prefers surgical strikes using Thunderhawk drops or teleportation-based incursions. This minimalism is not due to lack of resources but to philosophical choice. Destruction without purpose is considered wasteful, and collateral damage an affront to Corax's principles. The chapter's forge facilities beneath Deliverance's shadowed spires reflect this ethos, prioritizing maintenance and adaptability over mass production. Many of their artificers maintain long-standing exchange agreements with select Adeptus Mechanicus sects, particularly the Forges of Kayvaan, though relations remain guarded due to past betrayals dating back to the heresy era. Behaviourally, the Raven Guard differ markedly from other Astartes in temperament and social dynamics. They are introspective, withdrawn, and methodical, a result of both gene seed influence and cultural conditioning. While other chapters display overt camaraderie and martial bravado, Raven Guard interactions are characterized by silent understanding and functional efficiency. Emotional restraint is ingrained from the earlier stages of initiation. Even celebration is subdued. Victories are marked by quiet reflection rather than ceremony. The chapter's monastic restraint borders on asceticism, and personal glory is viewed with suspicion. Any Marine who draws undue attention to himself risks censure, for arrogance is considered the antithesis of stealth. Psychological assessments conducted by the Ordo Astartes suggest that the Raven Guard gene seed exhibits heightened serotonergic regulation, a speculative factor contributing to their emotional control and reduced aggression compared to other legions. However, the same trait also produces chronic tendencies toward isolation, melancholy, and survivor's guilt, particularly among long-serving veterans. The Deliverance-born recruits often possess similar temperaments before induction, shaped by the harsh industrial poverty of their homeworld. This cultural reinforcement ensures the chapter's behavioral consistency across generations. The chapter's instinctive combat behavior reflects an almost predatory patience. Engagements are preceded by hours or even days of observation and manipulation, as Raven Guard operatives dismantle enemy cohesion from within. Once the strike is initiated, it is absolute, brief, coordinated, and terminal. The psychological impact on enemies is profound. Few foes recover morale after a Raven Guard incursion. Their approach embodies the idea that fear itself is a weapon. Corax's teachings emphasize that control over the enemy's perception is as critical as control of the battlefield. Every operation thus becomes a psychological war, designed to make the foe doubt his safety even in apparent victory. Despite their clinical precision, the Raven Guard's ethical structure remains notably humane. Civilian casualties are avoided whenever possible, and local resistance cells are often trained and armed during occupation scenarios, a practice inherited from Corax's liberation of Deliverance. This pragmatic compassion has caused friction with certain Imperial commanders who view such acts as deviations from sanctioned protocol. Yet, for the Raven Guard, protecting the innocent is not sentimentality. It is strategic logic. A liberated population provides intelligence, terrain knowledge, and logistical aid. To Corax's heirs, every living civilian is a potential ally against tyranny, Imperial or otherwise. The behavioral unity of the Raven Guard is maintained through an unspoken moral code rather than dogmatic enforcement. Loyalty is expressed through discipline, not words. Commanders lead by example, and failure is examined analytically, never punitively. The absence of ritualized punishment is a defining cultural element. The chapter believes shame is a sufficient deterrent. This form of silent accountability cultivates internal strength without breeding resentment. Even the chaplains of the Raven Guard, though few, serve less as spiritual zealots and more as quiet moral anchors, preservers of identity rather than enforcers of creed. The compiled dossier opens under the seal of the Adeptus Administratum's Segmentum Command, appended with cross-verification sigils of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The file references are numerous, extending across multiple millennia and compiled through periodic audits of chapter performance, logistics, and gene seed integrity. The Raven Guard, though a first founding chapter, occupies a statistically inconsistent position within the greater framework of the Adeptus Astartes. To Administratum record keepers, their operational silence produces long data voids, interrupted only by fragments of campaign logs, requisition slips, and occasional astropathic confirmations of combat deployment. To the Mechanicus, they represent both an anomaly and a curiosity, a chapter that maintains near-complete autonomy in material production, while adhering to minimalistic doctrines that conserve resources without diminishing lethal effectiveness. The earliest compiled Administratum datasets identify the Raven Guard's operational strength as fluctuating between 600 and 1,000 battle brothers across multiple millennia. This range has remained stable despite significant attrition recorded in scattered warfronts. Logistical assessment attributes this to the chapter's consistent but low recruitment throughput. Mechanicus gene seed evaluation indicates a replication rate nearly 20% slower than the ultramarine baseline, a deficiency likely stemming from residual corruption sustained during the aftermath of the heresy-era gene stock loss on Deliverance. This limitation has influenced the chapter's entire logistic model, favouring surgical strikes and low-footprint operations over massed warfare. Administratum supply metrics list the Raven Guard among the most self-sufficient chapters within the Ultima Segmentum. Their industrial holdings on Deliverance produce nearly 80% of required armaments, armour components, and training apparatuses. Mechanicus observers stationed within the forges of Kayvaan report consistent, if minimalist, patterns of output. The assembly lines prioritise modular adaptability over volume. Data files show a preference for lightweight ceramite alloys and optimised Mark VI Corvus power armour variants, adapted for stealth infiltration and rapid redeployment. The scarcity of heavy armour assets, particularly Predators, Vindicators and Land Raiders, has been repeatedly noted in the Raven Guard's requisition requests. Mechanicus logistician Magos Thal 978 of the Kayvaan Forges recorded that the chapter's need for silence outweighs its need for shock power, a statement reflecting their deep operational philosophy and its direct translation into production priorities. Administratum Planetary Census and Resource Flow reports classified Deliverance as a low-output industrial world with high population density concentrated in orbital and subsurface manufactories. Despite its official categorization, Mechanicus data streams indicate a remarkable efficiency ratio per labor unit. The Raven Guard's command structure has integrated its serfs and civilian workforce into a near-total industrial symbiosis. Every manufactorum on Deliverance is dedicated either directly or indirectly to chapter supply, recruitment processing, or orbital maintenance. Civilian life is governed by the strict oversight of chapter-appointed stewards, functioning as an intermediary command layer between human workers and the Adeptus Astartes. The Administratum interprets this model as quasi-feudal, with minimal recorded uprisings or productivity fluctuations since the early 31st millennium. In terms of resource consumption, the Raven Guard demonstrated distinctive efficiency rarely found among first founding legions. Their average annual material requisition from Imperial depots is 35% lower than that of the Salamanders or Iron Hands. In Mechanicus notation, this is classified as suboptimal requisition volume, compensated by above-expected combat efficiency. Combat data comparisons from the Administratum's Munitorum archives confirm this interpretation. In recorded campaigns, the Raven Guard achieve average mission success ratios of 82% despite deploying smaller forces. Engagements typically last 54% shorter in duration compared to standard Astartes operations, further confirming that minimal logistic strain is a deliberate strategic choice, rather than an enforced constraint. The combined Administratum Mechanicus dossier also highlights a long-standing irregularity in astropathic communications. Raven Guard transmissions are frequently encoded using encryption keys several generations old, occasionally derived from modified Mechanicus binheric patterns. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica reports a significantly higher incidence of incomplete data bursts and null space message collapses originating from Deliverance compared to other chapter homeworlds. The Mechanicus interprets this as a consequence of the chapter's preference for clandestine deployment and data suppression protocols. The Administratum, however, maintains ongoing suspicion of deliberate obfuscation. As one Segmentum official noted in a commentary file dated to Millennia 41, year 251, no chapter that hides its records this thoroughly does so without reason. Their compliance is complete, but their transparency is selective. In fleet composition, Mechanicus void ship registries indicate a lean but capable Raven Guard flotilla. The battle barge Avenger of Deliverance remains their primary capital vessel, supported by 3 strike cruisers and an indeterminate number of rapid deployment craft. Ship design blueprints show modifications optimized for atmospheric insertion and multi-point dispersal rather than extended fleet warfare. Hull data recovered from Mechanicus inspection confirms these ships possess extensive void shielding and stealth hull augments sourced from pre-heresy designs, likely adaptations of prototype systems originating from Corax's Legion era. Administratum cost analysis logs mark these systems as maintenance-intensive but strategically invaluable, with efficiency ratings recorded as extreme operational economy offset by technological opacity. Logistical cross-referencing between Mechanicus supply chains and Administratum expenditures reveals another anomaly, a consistent underreporting of war losses. Raven Guard fleet returns often omit entire unit listings, or identify them under provisional numeric designations. While some Administratum clerks interpret this as clerical irregularity, Mechanicus field observers stationed at Deliverance argue it is intentional data masking. It is theorized that the chapter's ongoing genetic experimentation programs, descended from forbidden Primarch-level initiatives, require the concealment of failed prototypes or unverified combat subunits. Though such theories remain unproven, the consistency of missing records suggests the presence of structured secrecy beyond the tolerance of standard Imperial bureaucracy. Economically, the Raven Guard represent an administrative paradox. Despite maintaining one of the leanest chapter infrastructures, their long-term operational cost-effectiveness ranks among the highest of all Adeptus Astartes. Administratum reports project a resource sustainability curve extending 2 centuries beyond average Astartes models. Mechanicus projections confirm that Deliverance's manufactoria operate on near closed-loop resource recycling, with loss margins of less than 4%, an achievement credited to cross-pollination between Mechanicus efficiency doctrines and Raven Guard austerity practices. The Administratum's regional command files repeatedly cite the chapter's reluctance to attend conclave assemblies or provide full after-action reports. Requests for participation in segmentum fleet coordination are often met with silence or indirect compliance. However, Mechanicus records show consistent patterns of technological barter between Kayvaan's forges and Raven Guard artificers. Data packages indicate regular exchanges of stealth material composites, modified power armor schematics, and sensor dampening subroutines. The Raven Guard's knowledge in these fields is considered unorthodox even by Mechanicus standards. Magos Logistica Theta 4516 once summarized, "They do not innovate by discovery but by subtraction. What remains is efficiency made invisible." Administratum psychological assessments drawn from interrogations of serfs and indirect interviews with human auxiliaries describe the chapter's presence as quiet, disciplined, and morally restrained. Reports emphasize their unwillingness to engage in political discourse or power displays common to other chapters. While this is praised by some high-level Administratum officials as ideal compliance behavior, others interpret it as concealment. The Adeptus Mechanicus, less concerned with social conformity, categorizes this behavioral pattern under the operational label Shadow Doctrine, Omniscire Approved, a designation reserved for units whose tactical discretion outweighs administrative irregularities. When viewed through the composite data structure, the Raven Guard emerge as a chapter defined by calculated limitation. Their efficiency is not a product of abundance but of deliberate scarcity. Their secrecy is not rebellion but protection of methods, doctrines, and genetic heritage. Administratum projections suggest the chapter could maintain combat readiness for centuries with minimal external support. Mechanicus statistical modelling confirms the sustainability curve, predicting an operational half-life nearly double that of comparable Astartes formations. Together, both institutions classify the Raven Guard not as an outlier, but as a case study in adaptive military minimalism, a model impossible to replicate at scale but invaluable for theoretical examination. The consolidated Administratum and Mechanicus battle dossier on the Raven Guard extends across nearly 10,000 standard years of Imperial history. Each entry is marked by irregular data recovery intervals, missing fleet reports, and partially redacted logs. Despite this, several campaign clusters remain sufficiently detailed to form a coherent analysis of the chapter's martial doctrine, operational tendencies, and logistical implications. When viewed in aggregate, the Raven Guard's wars exhibit a statistical pattern consistent with small force deployment, high-value target elimination, and sustained avoidance of protracted engagements. Their command preference is for surgical strikes conducted under conditions of limited visibility, electromagnetic interference, or void silence. Mechanicus Battle Data Indexing identifies 3 distinct operational eras in Raven Guard warfare: the post-heresy reconstruction era, the Deliverance shadow campaigns, and the Millennia 41 adaptive conflicts. Administratum analysts classify each by measurable deviations in resource utilization, combat endurance, and casualty-to-victory ratio. The chapter's overall performance across these phases is recorded as above average within the Adeptus Astartes median, yet consistently below the expected output for total enemy annihilation. This statistical anomaly stems from the Raven Guard's strategic emphasis on containment, disruption, and systemic disassembly of hostile networks, rather than the mass destruction of enemy manpower. The post-heresy reconstruction era begins with the shattered remnants of the Raven Guard Legion following the massacre on Isstvan V. Administratum chronologues describe this event as the foundational trauma that reshaped the chapter's entire tactical identity. The Mechanicus categorizes it as a point of evolutionary divergence, where the loss of gene seed resources necessitated an enduring shift toward low-casualty, high-precision warfare. Surviving records show the chapter's combat deployments during the early 31st millennium were limited primarily to frontier stabilization missions within the Ultima Segmentum. Campaigns such as the Scouring of Carindus Prime and the Purge of Athelian Reach are documented as joint operations with the Raven Guard's newly formed successor chapters. Administratum battle tallies indicate casualty rates under 12%, a figure remarkably low for post-heresy recovery operations. Mechanicus observers attribute this to advanced reconnaissance algorithms and pre-strike infiltration by small kill teams. In subsequent centuries, the Raven Guard's engagements display increasing reliance on non-linear warfare. Their command model functions less like traditional Astartes planetary assault structures and more like a distributed command network, nodes of independent companies operating semi-autonomously under broad strategic directives. The Administratum refers to this as the Corvian Doctrine, a term derived from the tactical treatises left by Primarch Corax during the final days of the Great Crusade. This doctrine prioritizes information dominance over brute force. Battle records show that the Raven Guard rarely commit full forces to open-field warfare. Instead, they manipulate communications, supply routes, and morale structures of their enemies before striking at isolated elements. One of the earliest detailed Mechanicus combat surveys originates from the Deliverance reclamation actions of Millennia 32. At that time, the chapter fought to suppress residual heretic cults and mechanized insurgents on its own homeworld. Data recovered from ground-level servo skulls indicates precision strike patterns with overlapping triangulation grids, suggesting coordinated infiltration by multiple squads operating under strict silence protocols. Administratum observers calculated the campaign's duration as 43 days, resulting in the total annihilation of organized resistance, with 0 recorded losses among Astartes forces. Post-operation surveys show that Deliverance's industrial grid remained fully functional, reinforcing the hypothesis that the Raven Guard's primary objective was preservation of assets, rather than total eradication of opposition. In the millennia that followed, the chapter's operational range expanded significantly. Administratum deployment charts show Raven Guard presence in multiple conflict zones across the Eastern Fringe, most notably during the Purge of the Dusk Vortex and the Campaign of Iron Thorns. Mechanicus fleet records identify these wars as prime examples of adaptive logistics. The chapter operated with incomplete supply chains, maintaining combat readiness through scavenged materials and re-engineered enemy technology. The Raven Guard's tech marines demonstrated unorthodox repair methods, including field modification of damaged armor using Xenos alloys. Such acts were officially sanctioned by local Mechanicus contingents under the classification Operational Necessity Code Sigma 7. This unique collaboration between Astartes and Mechanicus field units remains rare among the Adeptus Astartes. Administratum will cost assessments consistently note the Raven Guard's aversion to collateral damage. In the Ataraxis cleansing campaign, where several Imperial Guard regiments failed to contain orc infestations, the chapter executed a 3-phase counter-offensive. Phase 1 involved orbital kinetic bombardment calibrated to target only enemy spore clusters and power centers. Phase 2 inserted infiltration teams to decapitate orc leadership networks. Phase 3 utilized precision melter strikes to sterilize reproduction nodes. Total campaign duration, 9 days. Civilian infrastructure loss, under 3%. Administratum evaluators declared the operation a textbook demonstration of surgical warfare, earning the chapter formal commendation from the Segmentum Command, though Mechanicus field logs mention several unverified sightings of cloaked gunships operating beyond standard sensor parameters. The Castrel Novem incident during Millennia 41 represents one of the best documented modern Raven Guard deployments. Mechanicus pick captures and Administratum after-action reports show the chapter engaged orc warbands across multiple continents, supporting an Imperial Guard invasion led by the Elysian drop troops. The Raven Guard deployed less than 2 full companies, yet neutralize several enemy war engines through coordinated sabotage and misdirection. Mechanicus telemetry from orbital auger arrays noted abrupt energy fluctuations across Orc defensive grids, later traced to synchronized demolitions of power nodes. Administratum analysis rated the operation as 91% successful. The chapter withdrew before Imperial Command could authorize reinforcement, maintaining its long-standing tradition of disengaging before post-battle auditing. Mechanicus combat analytics emphasized the Raven Guard's reliance on stealth phase technologies. Deliverance forges produce custom Auspex jammers, Vox disruptors, and reactive camo plating for Corvus pattern power armor. Data gathered during the War for Tarenta's Reach demonstrated these technologies' effectiveness. During the night offensive on Hive District Theta, Auspex recordings from Allied Imperial units failed to detect the Raven Guard's approach entirely, even at ranges under 100 meters. The chapter's forces emerged only after all enemy command signals were terminated. Mechanicus analysts assigned these stealth operations an efficiency factor of 0.92, exceeding standard Astartes frontal assault efficacy metrics by over 40%. Administratum observers studying post-combat casualty ratios note a recurring phenomenon. The Raven Guard routinely sustain below-average losses, but enemy casualty recovery teams often report inexplicable disappearances of enemy dead and wreckage. Mechanicus bio-tracking units suggest the chapter conducts battlefield extractions for analysis or purification. This practice is consistent with their emphasis on information security, ensuring no genetic or technological evidence of their presence remains. One recovered report from Magos Dominus Harlex 02 states, "They leave no remains, no patterns, no signatures. Their wars vanish as if the void itself consumes them." The Rift Wars of the Parther's Belt provide one of the few data-rich studies of Raven Guard fleet engagements. Mechanicus Auspex records detailed engagements fought entirely within void anomalies and asteroid fields. The chapter utilized gravity wells to mask launch trajectories, deploying drop pods through magnetic disturbances to evade sensor detection. Administratum battle estimates calculate the destruction of 3 Chaos warships and the elimination of multiple demon infestation nodes. Duration of combat, 17 hours. Imperial fleet losses, none. The efficiency of resource deployment during this battle is cited in Mechanicus War College data files as an example of optimized void stealth warfare. Their combat doctrine remains inherently asymmetric. The Raven Guard exploit environmental, psychological, and logistical variables to dismantle superior forces. In the suppression of the Vengeful rebellion, they inserted squads weeks before the main offensive. Administratum communications logs show enemy command collapsing from within, as local leaders were eliminated in rapid succession. Mechanicus telemetry recorded no mass troop movement from the chapter during the entire campaign, only sporadic power surges corresponding to short-range teleportation events. The rebellion ceased within a month. Administratum economic impact assessments list Vanquil's industrial base at 96% operational efficiency post-conflict. Throughout all recorded campaigns, the Raven Guard's fighting style remains defined by precision, restraint, and autonomy. Administratum tactical reviews classify them as Tier Alpha Strike Specialists. Mechanicus analysts categorize their warfare model under the term algorithmic obfuscation warfare, describing it as the systematic denial of enemy intelligence through tactical invisibility and communication collapse. The chapter's battle networks operate on closed circuits with no external synchronization, ensuring that even Imperial allies remain partially blind to their movements. This operational isolation produces occasional tension with Imperial Guard and Navy commanders, but Administratum post-battle evaluations consistently affirm the chapter's results justify the lack of coordination. Data cross-analysis between Administratum War Archives and Mechanicus sensor telemetry confirms that the Raven Guard's strength lies in preparation. Engagements involving the chapter exhibit unusually short active combat windows, preceded by extended intelligence gathering phases. In contrast to other chapters that deploy overwhelming force to overwhelm an enemy, The Raven Guard's combat rhythm follows a pattern of long silence, brief devastation, and immediate withdrawal. Mechanicus timing metrics refer to this as strike interval delta 7, a model describing high-intensity assaults of under 3 standard minutes yielding maximal enemy disarray. Administratum resource ledgers reinforce the image of efficiency. Across 22 documented campaigns, the chapter's average ammunition expenditure is recorded at 48% of the Astartes norm. Energy cell depletion averages 41% lower than baseline, while resupply cycles occur half as frequently. Mechanicus logistic algorithms calculate that these efficiencies translate into extended operational longevity with minimal support. Such findings lead to repeated recommendations within the Mechanicus to study Deliverance's forges for potential replication of Raven Guard manufacturing methods, recommendations consistently denied due to classified design rights enforced by the chapter. Behavioral analytics compiled during these conflicts reveal another distinct pattern. The Raven Guard prioritize minimal exposure to open combat zones. Administratum field scribes describe their approach as war without witnesses. This aligns with Mechanicus interpretations that the chapter operates on a doctrine of total data denial, ensuring all engagements remain unverifiable to external observers. Even in campaigns fought alongside other Imperial forces, such as the Siege of Astartes Lament, the Raven Guard's contributions are primarily inferred from aftermath indicators, neutralized enemy strongpoints, disrupted command relays, and residual signatures of energy discharge. The cumulative assessment from the combined Administratum Mechanicus archives defines the Raven Guard's warfare as both technically and philosophically distinct within the Imperium's military apparatus. Their combat operations achieve disproportionate results with minimal visibility and near-zero collateral disruption. The data implies that for every visible Raven Guard strike, numerous unrecorded operations occur beyond the scope of Imperial bureaucracy. Administratum clerks describe their wars as missing chapters in Imperial history. Mechanicus logicians view them as proof of the Omnissiah's law of optimal minimalism. Both agree on one point: no chapter wages war with less and achieves more. The data compiled in the aftermath of the Raven Guard's recorded operations presents a unique and often inconsistent pattern within Imperial war records. Administratum auditors frequently noted gaps between combat reports, incomplete unit manifests, and unexplained inconsistencies in fleet deployment logs. The Mechanicus archives corroborate these irregularities, identifying a recurring theme of battlefield obfuscation, not by enemy interference, but by the chapter's own doctrine of concealment. Within every dataset concerning the Raven Guard, visibility is intentionally limited. Engagements appear to end abruptly, troop numbers remain classified, and casualty reports are often redacted to near meaninglessness. An Imperial adjutant once summarized the problem in a sealed communique. The difficulty in studying the 19th Legion is not their absence of data, but their precision in removing it. Such commentary, while informal, has been supported by centuries of incomplete surveillance. Administratum field clerks tasked with verifying Raven Guard engagements consistently describe partial sensor logs and pick captures that terminate seconds before or after key engagements. It is believed that this is not due to chance, but to deliberate interference. Electromagnetic suppression fields, encrypted Vox signatures, and the use of transphasic cloaking arrays adapted from archaic Terran stealth schematics. The Mechanicus attributes these capabilities to the chapter's retained access to ancient Terran stealth patterns, believed to predate the Great Crusade. Fragmented data from the Nocturne and Kayvaan Manufactoria confirm that pre-heresy Raven Guard units once field-tested prototypes of the Corvus pattern armor, featuring sound-dampening fibers and active camo layers. The modern chapter maintains refinements of this design, although full schematics remain restricted under Mechanicus classification Sigma 4. Eyewitness accounts from Allied Guard regiments present a more human perspective, though often filtered through confusion and superstition. In one record dated to Millennia 41, year 320, Acadian field captain recounts the aftermath of a Raven Guard intervention on the planet Sotha Reach. He describes a sudden disruption in the enemy formation, followed by total silence. When the dust settled, he wrote, there were no gunshots, no screams, only bodies, every officer among the enemy gone, their throats opened as if cut by ghosts. The captain never saw the Astartes directly. The only evidence of their presence was a single black aquila painted in soot across a destroyed communications tower. This pattern of absence defines most post-battle records. Administratum war accountants often find it impossible to confirm exact troop numbers or supply expenditure during Raven Guard campaigns. Estimates vary wildly, some reports indicating the presence of a full company, others claiming no more than a dozen operatives. Mechanicus data servitors attempting to track munitions consumption often conclude with the same notation: statistical anomaly, insufficient data coherence. In contrast, casualty tallies among enemy forces remain consistently high. Across multiple engagements, the ratio of confirmed kills to observed Raven Guard presence remains among the highest of any chapter on record. The efficiency coefficient, the ratio of enemy losses to Astartes exposure time, frequently exceeds parameters considered theoretically sustainable. Mechanicus Magi have debated whether such outcomes are the result of superior intelligence gathering, predictive targeting algorithms, or simple instinct honed through centuries of guerrilla warfare. No definitive consensus exists. The aftermath of these operations frequently leaves environments altered beyond simple destruction. Terrain scans show signs of thermal suppression rather than widespread detonation, localized strikes that dismantle infrastructure without collateral loss. In several campaigns, communications arrays were surgically dismantled rather than bombed. Supply depots were emptied of ammunition but left structurally intact. To administratum logisticians, this pattern indicates deliberate restraint. The chapter appears to engage with a precision designed not for conquest, but for disruption. Entire wars have been halted simply by erasing command chains rather than armies. From a psychological standpoint, survivors often describe fear not of what the Raven Guard does, but of how unseen they remain while doing it. Imperial infantrymen who fought alongside them report that the Astartes rarely speak, even in victory. Orders are given through silent gestures or encrypted vox clicks. Those who attempt conversation describe the experience as unsettling, as though they are always elsewhere even when standing beside you. Administratum analysts categorize this behavioral profile as operational detachment, possibly the residual consequence of gene seed mutations unique to the Raven Guard line. The Mechanicus conducted multiple studies into this phenomenon, analyzing neurochemical data retrieved from preserved gene samples. The results indicated elevated activity in regions associated with spatial awareness and predictive reflex, suggesting a genetic predisposition toward anticipation and pattern recognition. This trait likely explains the chapter's preternatural ability to appear at precisely the moment of enemy vulnerability, a biological advantage that reinforces their tactical doctrine. However, these same mutations have led to long-standing concern among Mechanicus biologists. Early post-heresy records document severe degradation in the Raven Guard's gene seed, a consequence of the failed Terran cloning program initiated after the Isstvan betrayal. As a result, a significant portion of their genetic material became unstable, yielding high mutation rates and rendering replication unreliable. Although the chapter has since stabilized its progenoid strains through unknown means, Mechanicus purity tests continue to register minor irregularities. These deviations are not considered dangerous, but they mark the Raven Guard as genetically distinct, even within the lineage of the Primarch Corvus Corax. Administratum post-conflict assessments also highlight another recurring anomaly: the chapter's reluctance to claim planetary spoils or territorial authority after campaigns. Unlike other Astartes forces, the Raven Guard do not establish garrisons or demand tithes. Their primary engagement model is to intervene, destabilize, and withdraw. Economically, this produces minimal post-war cost to the Imperium, but also leaves behind power vacuums often filled by opportunistic governors or rebellious militias. As such, the chapter's interventions, while tactically flawless, sometimes generate secondary instability that later requires additional administratum oversight. Despite this, the Mechanicus rates their operational efficiency as exceptional. Fleet engagement metrics show minimal maintenance demands relative to mission success rates. The Shadow of Deliverance, the chapter's flagship, has logged over 3,000 combat deployments, with less than 1% downtime due to mechanical failure. This figure far exceeds the average for contemporary Astartes fleets. The ship's machine spirit is recorded as unusually compliant, perhaps reflecting the chapter's disciplined interface with Mechanicus adepts. Some tech priests have described the vessel as silent but responsive, mirroring the demeanour of its masters. Eyewitnesses from the Mechanicus often recount the eerie discipline displayed by the Raven Guard even during recovery or repair operations. A report from Forge Station Kayvaan describes an incident where an entire strike cruiser crew performed shipboard maintenance in complete silence for 7 standard hours. The Magos overseeing the process noted no vocal exchanges, only mechanical synchronization, as if every member shared the same intent without need for words. He concluded his report with a simple line: "The flesh imitates the machine, and the machine obeys." After-action analyses compiled over the past 10 millennia consistently present the Raven Guard as a paradox within the Imperial war apparatus. They are among the most efficient users of Imperial resources, yet the least transparent in how those resources are deployed. Administratum projections place their efficiency quotient at a ratio of 1 to 20, meaning that one Raven Guard operation achieves the logistical effect of 20 standard Guard campaigns. Yet the corresponding transparency index remains among the lowest in the Imperium. Only the Officio Assassinorum operates under stricter data restriction. It is believed that this secrecy is not only strategic but cultural, a continuation of Corax's founding principles of autonomy and trust in precision over display. Mechanicus sociologists speculate that the chapter's behavioral conditioning reinforces an almost monastic restraint, bordering on detachment. This manifests in ritualized silence, minimal ceremony, and near-total avoidance of public recognition. Administratum scribes attempting to catalogue their victories often find no official records submitted. Instead, data is reconstructed retroactively through environmental scans, recovered shell casings, or intercepted enemy transmissions. The cumulative effect of this operating pattern is twofold. For the Imperium's war machine, the Raven Guard represent a strategic advantage, precise, efficient, and self-sustaining. For the Administratum, they are a logistical enigma, nearly impossible to predict, quantify, or administrate. The Mechanicus, for their part, views them as a living system of adaptive warfare, a hybrid of human and machine logic functioning without the usual constraints of hierarchy or visibility. In their final assessment dossier, compiled in Millennia 41, year 980, the Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus issued a joint summary concerning the chapter. It read, Subject 19th Legion, operational pattern consistent with predictive stealth doctrine, behavioral markers stable, resource expenditure minimal, combat efficiency extreme, logistical interference ongoing, recommend continued observation, restricted interference, and preservation of current doctrinal autonomy. The conclusion has not changed in over 1,000 years. Every new record merely reinforces the same paradox that defines the Raven Guard, visible only when they choose to be, known only in the aftermath of their absence. The following compilation was drawn from sealed transcripts within the Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Xenos Joint Observation Cell, sub-designation Vigil Tenebrae. Access to this file is restricted under triple auspice seal and requires authorization beyond the rank of Inquisitor Lord. The Raven Guard have, over the course of 10 millennia, drawn the attention of multiple Ordos for reasons that extend beyond standard compliance evaluation. The cause is not heresy, nor open deviation, but a sustained inconsistency in data that no other chapter of the Adeptus Astartes presents to such a degree. The Inquisition has long noted the paradox. perfect obedience without verifiable proof of action. Initial investigations began in Millennia 31, year 870, shortly after the catastrophic events of the Isstvan betrayal and the failed genetic reconstruction that followed. Surviving administratum reports from that era recorded abnormalities in the Raven Guard's genetic integrity, degraded gene seed, unstable replication matrices, and unaccounted clones. However, subsequent centuries revealed the presence of fully operational Raven Guard companies, their numbers replenished far beyond what Mechanicus projections considered possible. The question of how such recovery occurred remains unconfirmed. No gene seed requisition records exist to explain the restoration. The most common explanation cited in Ordo Mechanicus files is that the chapter conducted unsanctioned bioexperiments during the reconstruction period, later erased from official record. Inquisition analysts reviewing Kayvaan's planetary archives report that the manufacturer once maintained entire lower levels sealed by the chapter, inaccessible to Imperial surveyors. When questioned, the Raven Guard's representatives claimed the areas were unsafe due to reactor instability. A subsequent inquisitorial expedition, conducted under the authority of Lord Inquisitor Tholman in Millennia 36, year 250, found no active radiation readings and instead uncovered partially dismantled cloning equipment, its mechanisms incompatible with Mechanicus standard designs. The recovered fragments bore marks of pre-Imperial Terran craftsmanship. The incident report was sealed under reference Kayvaan Anomaly File 72, its conclusions withheld even from the Fabricator General. Further inconsistencies arise in the matter of presence. Multiple Inquisition field cells have reported instances of the Raven Guard appearing in sectors where no active deployment orders existed. These occurrences are usually justified post factum by retroactive administratum entries, which curiously appear in data logs days or weeks after the engagements. Autochronos verification of timestamps confirms that such additions were inserted asynchronously, as if manually backdated. The motive remains unclear. In one such instance, the Battle of Varkoth Prime, Millennia 41, year 110, saw a Raven Guard strike force intervene to rescue an ecclesiarchal delegation under siege by heretic cults. No distress signal had been transmitted, and no nearby Imperial fleets reported Raven Guard presence prior to the event. Witnesses recount that the Astartes materialized from orbital descent patterns that did not correspond to any known trajectory. Vox records show static interference until after the battle concluded. Inquisition operatives dispatched weeks later discovered no living Raven Guard and only a single black feather insignia carved into the hull of a destroyed lander. Administratum verification of the chapter's movements for that period placed all active companies off-world in another subsector. The Inquisition's biometric and temporal analyses classify the Varkoth incident as anomalous intervention category Gamma. Cross-referencing of spatial logs and chronometric drift data indicate a potential phase distortion consistent with localized warp displacement, though Mechanicus authorities deny the Raven Guard's possession of such technology. It is believed that they may possess an unrecorded form of short-range teleportation array, distinct from standard pattern teleportariums. The theory remains unverified, though traces of residual energy matching low-level warp harmonics were documented at the site. The Inquisition's concern extends beyond anomalous appearances. A review of captured enemy testimonies has revealed a recurring theme: the perception of multiple Raven Guard units acting simultaneously in regions separated by light years. Heretic leaders captured in distinct war zones describe their attackers in identical terms: silent, precise, and wearing the same chapter insignia down to individual markings. The Ordo Xenos initially dismissed these as delusions induced by fear and sensory overload, yet further data alignment revealed identical genetic and heraldic signatures across simultaneous engagements. If these reports are accurate, then either the chapter deploys identical clone operatives or maintains an as-yet undisclosed method of rapid interstellar projection. During a classified council between Ordo Hereticus analysts and Magos Biology's representatives, a potential hypothesis was raised and subsequently buried: that remnants of Corvus Corax's lost genetic experimentations persisted in covert form. The original Primarch's attempts to accelerate Astartes' creation through gene-coding manipulation were known to have produced aberrant results, malformed warriors with accelerated metabolic decay and unpredictable psychic instability. All surviving subjects were reportedly destroyed by Corax himself. However, fragments of Mechanicus logs from Deliverance show genetic files with checksum discrepancies, suggesting later alterations to the dataset. Whether these represent an attempt to purify or replicate Corax's lost process remains debated. Field operatives have occasionally reported the presence of Raven Guard contingents, composed of individuals with non-standard phenotypes, taller than standard Astartes, with dermal discoloration and ocular glow consistent with heightened melanochromatic mutation. These observations, while unconfirmed, appear in reports from at least 3 separate Ordo cells over a span of 4 centuries. The chapter has never acknowledged the existence of such individuals, nor has the Mechanicus retrieved specimens for study. Equally troubling are the patterns of disappearance surrounding the chapter's interactions with the Inquisition itself. Records show that at least 7 inquisitorial investigators assigned to audit the Raven Guard between millennia 38 and 40 were later declared missing in action. No confirmed deaths, no recovered remains. The last of these was Inquisitor Dale Ramin, who vanished following a private meeting with Chapter Master Kayvaan Shrike aboard the Shadow of Deliverance. The ship departed Deliverance orbit shortly after the meeting. Subsequent tracking logs were erased. The Inquisition has officially listed Ramin as presumed lost during warp transit, though internal memos suggest deliberate obfuscation. Despite these irregularities, no evidence of heresy or Xenos taint has ever been substantiated. Every genetic and doctrinal audit has concluded that the Raven Guard remain loyal to the Imperium and the Emperor. Their deviation lies not in belief, but in methodology, a divergence so precise and unprovable that it defies censure. The Ordo Hereticus describes them as a chapter that fulfills Imperial objectives without Imperial observation. Such independence, while technically permissible, raises long-standing discomfort within the Inquisition hierarchy. One document, marked Redacted Protocol 9, records a request from an Ordo representative for covert surveillance of the chapter's operations. The response, believed to originate from a senior inquisitor of the Ordo Astartes, denies the request with the statement, "Observation of the 19th requires visibility, and visibility invalidates observation." The phrase has since become an informal saying among inquisitorial archivists studying stealth-based chapters. Among the strangest data fragments are those connected to psychic detection. Astropathic readings from sectors shortly before confirmed Raven Guard activity often show faint psionic imprints, described as whispers or shadows in the warp, too coordinated to be random noise yet too faint to belong to any known psyker. The Inquisition classifies these under echo phenomena. Some Magos Psychana researchers theorize that the chapter's collective combat operations generate residual psychic signatures, an unconscious echo of intent born from genetic lineage linked to Corax's own psychic potential. Others believe it to be an unrelated warp mirage caused by the stealth systems of their fleet. Regardless, the phenomenon remains unexplainable and is often redacted from public records to prevent theological speculation. Another unexplained finding concerns the Raven Guard's apparent ability to predict enemy movements with accuracy exceeding statistical probability. Inquisitorial pattern analysis over 300 documented campaigns shows a recurring predictive rate of over 90% regarding enemy ambushes, flanking attempts, and reinforcement arrival times. Mechanicus data models cannot reproduce such success rates through conventional surveillance, leading some within the Ordo to suspect either psychic foresight or access to forbidden predictive algorithms, possibly remnants of pre-heresy artificial intelligence systems. No confirmation has been found. Internal Inquisition discourse remains divided on the matter. Some inquisitors, particularly within the Ordo Xenos, propose that the Raven Guard's genetic line retains traces of the Primarch's preternatural cognitive sensitivity. not psychic in the sanctioned sense, but operating on instinctive subconscious pattern awareness. Others reject the theory as superstition and maintain that the chapter's results stem purely from superior reconnaissance and environmental control. Regardless of theory, field data continues to challenge explanation. In the aftermath of the Lorien Rift campaign, multiple Vox intercepts recovered from enemy frequencies record moments of panic before any confirmed Imperial presence. Seconds before engagement, enemy units describe the feeling of being watched, or the sound of movement without source. These sensations precede contact by measurable intervals. Inquisition analysts have correlated these recordings with tremor patterns in the local warp field, concluding that the Raven Guard's presence may create localized psychic dissonance, detectable only by those sensitive to the warp. The chapter has neither confirmed nor denied awareness of this phenomenon. One particularly classified entry involves the so-called Deliverance Echo incident, dated to Millennia 41, year 890. A Mechanicus relay on the edge of the Kayvaan orbital ring detected duplicate transponder signals matching the shadow of Deliverance within the same temporal frame. One docked in orbit, another positioned 1.2 astronomical units away. Both signatures exhibited identical power readings and Vox encryption codes. The anomaly persisted for 37 seconds before one signal vanished without trace. A formal Inquisition audit requested full disclosure from the chapter, but the reply from Chapter Master Shrike consisted of a single line: "The shadow falls where the light cannot reach." The report was archived and sealed, marked as unresolved. Cumulatively, these findings paint a profile that is neither heretical nor explainable. A loyal servant functioning on the edge of Imperial comprehension. The Ordo Hereticus concludes that the Raven Guard's loyalty is genuine, but their nature defies the strict logic of Imperial categorization. They are both tangible and elusive, obedient yet independent, accounted for yet absent. The Mechanicus refers to this state as operational superposition. The Inquisition simply calls it the shadow paradox. For now, the Inquisition maintains a stance of passive observation. Interference is deemed counterproductive and potentially destabilizing. As one Ordo Hereticus summary notes, the Raven Guard are not to be controlled, only acknowledged. They serve the throne by means unseen. To question the shadow is to invite blindness. The investigation continues, though progress remains minimal. Most files within the Inquisition's archives end with the same closing phrase: a bureaucratic surrender to the inexplicable. Further study prohibited by absence of observable data. No corruption detected, no conclusion attainable. The Inquisition's records concerning the Raven Guard contain recurring irregularities, inconsistencies that cannot be attributed to clerical error or battlefield confusion. Across the span of millennia, the chapter's recorded activities exhibit gaps of time, conflicting accounts, and inexplicable absences of evidence where entire campaigns should be accounted for. The pattern repeats too precisely to be coincidental. What remains are fragments reconstructed from second-hand testimony, partial Mechanicus data, and damaged administratum archives, each offering incomplete perspectives on the same silent operations. The first anomaly identified under inquisitorial cross-reference appeared in the aftermath of the Thrummer's engagements. A Mechanicus fleet log recorded the total destruction of a Raven Guard vessel during orbital conflict. Yet decades later, the same ship appeared again in active service, bearing the same hull markings but a different registry designation. No record exists of its reconstruction, nor were requisition requests filed for its replacement. Servitor auditing confirmed its machine spirit signature matched the supposedly lost vessel. The incident was dismissed at the time as clerical recycling of data, but over the centuries, similar occurrences multiplied. Ships reported destroyed or decommissioned resurfaced under new identifiers, their histories cleansed and overwritten as though by systematic intent. Comparable patterns manifest within the chapter's ground campaigns. During the cleansing of the blood-stilled plain in the late 37th millennium, an Inquisition observer attached to the Imperial Guard reported the sudden appearance of black-armoured Astartes who coordinated their assault with perfect synchronization, striking without preliminary orbital bombardment or long-range signal. The entire heretic enclave was neutralized overnight. When the Inquisition survey team entered the stronghold the following morning, they found the enemy dead yet unscarred. There were no blast patterns, no blade wounds, no indication of chemical or viral agents. The local atmosphere remained sterile of contaminants, but the bodies bore signs of complete neural failure. The Raven Guard contingent, already in withdrawal, refused debriefing and departed the system without acknowledgement of their presence. No records of the detachment's return to Deliverance exist. Another record, partially redacted, describes the siege of Carthage Secundus. The world had suffered a demonic incursion, and the Raven Guard were among several Astartes chapters dispatched under Ordo Malleus oversight. For the first 72 hours of the conflict, Vox Traffic confirmed coordinated assaults led by Captain Kael Varath of the 5th Company. On the 4th day, all transmissions ceased. When Imperial reinforcements landed weeks later, the demonic entities had already dispersed, their physical manifestations dissolved. No sign of the Raven Guard remained, yet a faint residual energy pattern matching teleportation discharge was detected at multiple coordinates around the planetary poles. The Mechanicus observers attached to the Ordo Malleus noted that the frequencies did not align with standard teleportarium technology and exhibited characteristics inconsistent with warp translation. The findings were sealed and reclassified as a localized warp event. In later centuries, similar signatures appeared in multiple Raven Guard operations. Telemetry traces from post-battle surveys show momentary distortions in electromagnetic fields preceding the chapter's insertion or extraction. These distortions generate no warp interference readings, suggesting a form of spatial manipulation distinct from sanctioned Imperial technologies. The phenomenon has been labelled the Kaled sequence, referencing the world on which it was first recorded. No known Mechanicus device replicates the effect. The hypothesis that the Raven Guard maintains secret relics derived from the technological remnants of Corax's own experiments has circulated within certain research enclaves, though never proven. The Deliverance Excision remains the most heavily classified entry involving the chapter. All accessible fragments indicate that an unregistered Raven Guard element enacted orbital sterilization of a mining moon that had fallen silent. The planet was found to have hosted an emergent artificial intelligence of unknown origin. Surviving data logs from nearby systems record a single encrypted transmission received moments before the strike, its translation reading only, "Containment failed, deliverance preserved." Subsequent investigation confirmed that the Raven Guard force responsible did not return to their fortress monastery. The incident was buried under the pretext of a mining accident and has never been acknowledged in official Imperial records. Throughout the 41st millennium, these irregularities compound. Data auditors within the Inquisition have identified a recurring cycle across the Raven Guard's operational history. Every few decades, the chapter's documented activity drops precipitously. Records vanish from administratum archives, Mechanicus data clusters experience unexplained erasure, and planetary campaign summaries omit mention of their presence altogether. The phenomenon follows no known pattern of censorship and appears to occur regardless of political climate or imperial decree. Each subsequent reappearance of the chapter is marked by the sudden resolution of crises, the abrupt end of insurrections, or the unexplained disappearance of xeno-infestations. When inquiries are made, responses from Deliverance remain brief and formal. Communications reference operational discretion and chapter self-auditing. Attempts by Ordo agents to conduct audits or demand full transparency have met logistical obstruction, often through data confusion or administrative redirection. The Raven Guard maintain their records within isolated cogitator vaults that resist external synchronization, rendering cross-reference impossible. The Inquisition's attempts to duplicate their internal systems have consistently failed, as every copied archive self-corrupts within standard Terran hours of transfer. Some within the Order Mechanicus division suggest the corruption is not random but coded, an adaptive encryption system embedded within the chapter's machine spirits. Such security measures are not unknown among the Astartes, yet none exhibit self-erasure at this scale. The fact that every data failure coincides with operations of extreme sensitivity has led to the classification of the Raven Guard as information sealed by design. On several occasions, Inquisition field teams have reported unexplainable battlefield phenomena surrounding the chapter's interventions. These include total suppression of sound during assaults, complete sensor blackout across kilometers of terrain, and the appearance of Astartes forces in areas physically unreachable within the time frame indicated. The Mechanicus refers to these as absence zones. Post-engagement surveys show environmental disruption consistent with temporal distortion, but without warp residue. Attempts to study the effect directly have failed. Monitoring servitors deployed during later Raven Guard operations returned no data, only blank records containing timestamps without visual or auditory content. The psychological impact on those who witness their actions has also been noted. Imperial officers and guardsmen frequently describe sensations of sudden calm preceding Raven Guard attacks, as though the surrounding world fell silent. Some testimonies report visual distortions, the impression of movement in peripheral vision that leaves no trace. Others recall the sudden presence of black-armoured figures where none had stood moments earlier. No confirmed psychic readings accompany these accounts, suggesting a discipline of stealth that extends beyond the physical into perceptual manipulation. A statistical review conducted by the Inquisition's Analytical Division confirms a numerical anomaly consistent across recorded centuries. In every fifth major engagement involving the Raven Guard, no more than 60% of standard documentation remains intact. The remaining 40% exhibits data corruption, intentional deletion, or unexplained loss. This ratio repeats with uncanny precision regardless of era or region. The conclusion drawn from the data suggests a deliberate periodic cleansing of history itself, an operational doctrine centered on anonymity so absolute that even the Mechanicus cannot reliably chronicle it. The cumulative result is a chapter that appears in Imperial history like a shadow passing through light, visible only in fragments, never in full. To the Administratum, they are a logistical enigma. To the Mechanicus, a technological paradox. To the Inquisition, a necessary mystery tolerated only because their silence serves the greater function of Imperial survival. What remains undisputed is that wherever the Raven Guard intervene, the record bends. Battles are won, enemies vanish, and history forgets how it occurred. The sealed archives of the Order Hereticus refer to this tendency by a single designation, operational null. It is neither commendation nor condemnation, but acknowledgement. The Raven Guard fight not for recognition, but for erasure, the preservation of the Imperium through the disappearance of its shadows, and so their history remains not in the chronicles of men, but in the gaps between them, written only in absence. The final Inquisition evaluations concerning the Raven Guard exist not as open records, but as compartmentalized fragments distributed across several ordos. Each fragment bears identical encryption markers, a sign that the data was never intended to be unified. It is believed this structure was intentional, ensuring that no single entity within the Imperium could reconstruct the chapter's complete operational history. The fragments were later combined under inquisitorial coordination only after several centuries of classified review, producing what is now referred to internally as the Deliverance Codex, a restricted compilation that remains sealed under the Magenta security tier. The Deliverance Codex opens with an admission of failure. It acknowledges the limits of inquisitorial observation where the Raven Guard are concerned. The authors concede that traditional investigative methods, surveillance, interrogation, and record correlation yield negligible results. The chapter's command structure is insulated by a level of information compartmentalization comparable to the Officio Assassinorum. Even among their own ranks, individual companies rarely possess complete awareness of one another's deployments. Command instructions are transmitted via encrypted translocation packets that decay upon receipt, leaving no traceable trail of origin. This method has prevented the Inquisition from mapping even a single complete campaign chain with accuracy. The few internal reports that escape this veil describe the Raven Guard's self-governing hierarchy as an efficient paradox, decentralized in structure but unified in intent. Decision-making authority is distributed through an intricate network of captains, sergeants, and specialized shadow operatives who act autonomously, according to pre-assigned operational codes. Once a mission begins, higher command rarely interferes. To the Inquisition, this system appears dangerously close to unaccountability, yet its results demonstrate precise strategic alignment across multiple war zones, implying that the chapter's discipline functions on principles not fully understood, possibly cognitive conditioning rooted in pre-heresy Legion doctrines. Among the sealed files, one record remains under continuous classification, a document catalogued as Apocryphal Dossier 7. The file concerns an event referenced only as the Silence of Lycaon Reach. The available fragment describes an orbital station found devoid of all biological and mechanical life. The station's energy cores remained active, power systems stable, yet no trace of the inhabitants survived. Surveillance arrays detected faint spectral signatures consistent with Astartes' presence minutes before total blackout. The investigating Inquisitor noted that the signatures matched known Raven Guard bioscans. Further scans revealed null residue, a form of psychic dampening not known to be within the chapter's standard capabilities. The report concludes abruptly with a final remark indicating that the Void remembers what the living cannot. The remainder of the file was sealed by order of the High Lords and relocated to the dark vaults beneath Terra. A separate set of sealed reports traces the chapter's ongoing operations within unrecorded sectors of the Segmentum Obscurus. The data originates from trade convoys and exploratory fleets that vanished after transmitting emergency beacons containing only partial visual feeds. These feeds display the aftermath of battlefields cleared with surgical precision, no remains left behind, no signals detectable. The imagery often ends with static resembling the interference generated by anti-psionic dampers. In several cases, the last visible symbol before distortion is the black wing of the Raven Guard. Mechanicus analysis teams attempting to interpret these patterns reached no consensus. Some hypothesized that the chapter employs experimental suppression technology, perhaps derived from remnants of Corax's original research into stealth phase matter. Others argued that the phenomena represent not advanced technology, but an effect of genetic manipulation, a residual byproduct of the Primarch's unstable experiments with the Emperor's gene seed. The Inquisition officially abstains from endorsing either theory, though internal commentary notes the possibility that both may hold truth in different degrees. The closing section of the Deliverance Codex addresses a more philosophical concern. It questions the nature of obedience when secrecy becomes indistinguishable from autonomy. The Raven Guard's extreme self-containment isolates them even from the broader network of Imperial institutions. The chapter accepts Imperial orders yet reserves the right to determine method, timing, and disclosure. To some within the Ordo Hereticus, this independence borders on insubordination. To others, it is a calculated adaptation necessary for survival in a galaxy where information is as lethal as weaponry. The chapter's operations function in environments where exposure equates to failure. Infiltration campaigns, assassination of planetary-scale insurgencies, or the quiet eradication of heresy before it manifests. The Inquisition acknowledges that such tasks demand an organization capable of vanishing, not only from the battlefield, but from the historical record itself. The most revealing commentary comes from the internal assessment appended to the Codex by a senior Ordo representative. It states that the Raven Guard practice loyalty through omission. The remark summarizes the chapter's ethos more accurately than any data entry. Their loyalty to the Imperium is expressed not by declarations or triumphs recorded for posterity, but by the absence of disaster where they have acted. They do not appear in the great chronicles of the Imperium because their victories are structured to leave nothing that can be chronicled. In this way, they fulfill the Emperor's will not as symbols of glory, but as mechanisms of preservation. Several psychological analyses appended to the file speculate on the cumulative toll of this philosophy upon the chapter's mentality. Isolation, secrecy, and self-erasure have consequences even among the genetically enhanced. While no confirmed reports of schism exist within the Raven Guard since the heresy, patterns in their communications suggest an increasing detachment from Imperial centrality. They rarely attend gatherings of other chapters. Their representatives within the Adeptus Astartes councils are present in form but minimal in participation. The tone of their correspondence reflects discipline without warmth, a constant, almost ritualized austerity. The Inquisition interprets this as evidence that the chapter sustains its unity through suppression of individuality, maintaining cohesion by removing the very impulses that create divergence. The section of the file concerning gene seed evaluation raises additional concern. The Raven Guard gene stock remains stable by official assessment, yet unverified reports indicate that the rate of mutation in their progenoid organs is slightly elevated. The Mechanicus attributes this to lingering flaws from the Horus Heresy era, when Corax's attempts at accelerated gene seed production introduced instability into the Legion's biological template. The Raven Guard continue to monitor these mutations internally, refusing external analysis. Samples provided to the Inquisition for study have been consistently incomplete or artificially neutralized. While such behavior would normally invite investigation under suspicion of genetic heresy, the Order biologist concludes that the chapter's self-monitoring procedures are sufficient, noting that their deviations have not compromised purity or function. Beyond biological and technical evaluation lies the issue of their perception within the Imperium. Among Imperial citizens, the Raven Guard occupy a paradoxical status, admired for their efficiency, yet feared for their silence. Few worlds ever witness their presence, and fewer still retain memories of them. The civilian populace knows them only through rumour, stories of black-armoured figures who end wars in the dark and depart without ceremony. Even among Imperial commanders there exists uncertainty as to how to interpret their interventions. The absence of public acknowledgement has led some sectors to doubt their existence altogether, treating them as an administrative myth created to conceal unrecorded operations. The Inquisition does not discourage this belief, for the myth serves the same purpose as the truth. The Deliverance Codex closes with a synthesis report from the Order Hereticus, summarizing the final stance of the Inquisition toward the Raven Guard. The report concludes that surveillance of the chapter is unnecessary and counterproductive. It asserts that their secrecy is not rebellion but doctrine, a continuation of Corax's original vision adapted to the modern Imperium. The Raven Guard's suppression of their own identity ensures that the enemies of mankind cannot predict or counter their movements. Their erasure from record is therefore interpreted not as concealment from authority, but as an operational form of protection. In the words of the final entry, to know them fully would be to diminish their purpose. From the Inquisition's perspective, the Raven Guard represent an extreme outcome of loyalty. They have evolved beyond the need for validation or remembrance. Their victories exist in silence. Their failures dissolve into mystery. For an Imperium built upon control and record, such entities are inherently unsettling. Yet in a galaxy perpetually on the brink of collapse, even the Inquisition concedes that the Imperium requires shadows as much as light. Thus, the final notation under the classified file reads, "The Raven Guard, observation concluded, monitoring suspended, subject remains within acceptable parameters of loyalty. No further inquiry authorized without approval from the High Lords of Terror. Beyond this point, there are no additional entries." The file ends abruptly, without closing signature, without validation mark. What remains is only the absence, a fitting conclusion for a chapter defined by its silence.